Hi, this is Lucien, DH7LM, and welcome back to Ham Radio Soul. Today I'd like to talk about Linux for ham radio, which I also use and which is great. But before I show you quickly how to get it running for ham radio, whether you are a beginner or you already know a little about Linux, let's consider some pros and cons why you might want to use Linux for ham radio and what might be the pitfalls. So let's start with the cons. To be honest, it can be a bit complicated. So I've dabbled with Linux for years now, on and off. My first Linux version, I think, was SUSE Linux 5 or something like that back in the days. And it's always a bit tricky to get it running and to figure stuff out. And the Linux guys always tell you, it's gotten so much better. But you still get to a point sometimes where you need to Google stuff and where you need to learn some commands and all of that. So it has really become pretty easy to use Linux, but still there are some pitfalls. So that's the first thing you might want to consider. Secondly, with regards to available software, the good news is that you get all the important programs for ham radio, such as WJSTX, FLDG, and decent logging software. So you're covered with that. You get all of that. That's no problem at all. However, if you use some special programs, such as some special contest logging software that you need, or maybe you need to have the same software as your other club members, if you're participating in a contest or something like that, that can get a little bit tricky on Linux because not all the software is there. Another thing is that while there's excellent programs in Linux nowadays, also for ham radio, there are also some programs that frankly are not that great and some of them even look very ugly. So that's one thing to consider. Now for the pros. First, I think Linux really has an inbuilt ham spirit, so to say. It's open source. That means everyone can theoretically mess with the code and perhaps more importantly read the code and see that there's nothing strange going on there. So it's completely open, it's free, so you don't have to pay anything for all the software, and it's kind of like an environment to tinker with. It's really nice, and I think that is really close to what we hams are all about. Being open, sharing stuff, building stuff free, and making an effort to learn something new. All of that, I think, is really there in Linux. So Linux and ham radio really go together, in my opinion. This also brings us to the learning aspect, because if you use Linux, not only for ham radio, perhaps you use it for other things as well, but you really get to know the operating system, you get to know the command line, you get to know your way around it and all of that. And that's really cool because for one thing, the Raspberry Pi is also based on Linux. So if you know Linux, you know the Raspberry Pi, and you can do all the great ham projects available for the Raspberry Pi very easily. So that's a huge plus. Another thing to consider is that Linux runs really well even on older computers, so that's really cool. So if you have an old laptop or an old desktop PC, chances are you can get Linux to run smoothly on these machines. So I'd say give Linux a try. If you're a ham, it's really lots of fun, you learn tons of stuff, it's really cool. So thumbs up for Linux, and now I'll show you some basics and how to get it running and what you might want to consider with regards to ham radio and all the programs available. So let's get started. As you can see, this is my Linux desktop, and you might wonder what kind of Linux you should get, because there are so many different distributions, which basically are different flavors of Linux. So I'll make it easy for you and just recommend a distribution. which I think is really great for ham radio, and this is called Linux Mint. You can see here the website, and there are again 3 different flavors of this Linux Mint distribution. So it's all kind of it's all a bit complicated, but I would recommend you go for the Linux Mint Xfce distribution. The Xfce is basically the window manager of the distribution, the way it looks like, and it's really cool. You can see it here, by the way, the Xfce edition, and I really like it because it doesn't require a lot of resources, so it's very light on the computer and it works perfectly well. Also, Linux Mint is based on the Ubuntu distribution, which means you have access to all the great software packages available for Ubuntu and for Debian as well. So that's really a good choice in my opinion. So now, as you can see, I have opened the Linux Mint, currently in version 19.1, and the first thing, of course, that you need to do is download the thingy. So if I go back to the website, you see here a download button. So you have the different options here. So you click on Linux Mint, and it should be the current version, of course. And then you have here the different flavors. You have Cinnamon, Mate, and Xfce. And we go for Xfce. You can see here you can either choose 32-bit or 64-bit, depending on your computer. If you have a new computer, then you should probably choose the 64-bit. If it's a really old machine, maybe you should prefer 32 bits. So you click on there, then you find all the different mirrors where you can download it, and just click on one of those. And there you go. It should then start downloading, which I don't do now because I've already installed it, right? So once you have it downloaded, it's a file that ends with the ISO, which basically means it's a whole bootable device. It's a whole package of files put into one file. And what you need to do then is create a USB stick that you can then boot from, right? So after that, you can just put it in your computer and boot the computer, and it will boot from the USB stick, and it will boot the Linux system, and then you can go through the install procedure. So you might wonder how to get the ISO image file onto your USB stick. Well, first of all, it's probably a good idea to check out the installation guide, which you can find here under download documentation, and then you choose your language, and here it is. And as you can see, they have a hint here: create a bootable media. So if you click on that, they basically tell you what you need to do. And assuming that you're in Windows, Mac OS, or another Linux distribution, they recommend the software Etcher. And this is really a great little program that lets you burn, so to speak, or flash, as it's called in the case of USB sticks, your image on your USB stick. It's pretty simple, so you can download it whether you're on a Mac or Windows or somewhere else, and you just it's pretty self-explanatory, right? So just go ahead, download it, and put your USB stick into your computer and flash it on there. So that's pretty easy. So what's the next thing you need to do? Of course, you need to take the USB stick, as I said, put it into the computer where you want to install Linux Mint, and boot the computer. It should boot from the USB stick. If it doesn't do so, you probably need to change the BIOS settings so that it can boot from the USB stick. Usually you do that by pressing the escape button right after you turn on your computer. So that's also pretty easy. What will then happen is the computer will start Linux Mint directly. It's called live boot. So you already see the Linux software, and there you have a button on the desktop called install Linux. So it will look similar to my desktop here, except that you have a button, I think, on the desktop somewhere that says install Linux Mint. So you just click it and it will guide you through the installation process, and it's really pretty straightforward. One trick that could be helpful is to use a second computer or laptop in case you need to Google some stuff or to find out things if you run into problems or if you have a question or something. So that's useful. Okay, so now that you have Linux installed, what can you do in terms of ham radio? So let me just tell you that there are a bunch of programs that you probably need. So in Linux Mint, the easiest way to do all this is through the software manager. So let me see where it is. Software manager here, I just typed soft there, and then the software manager will come up. There it is. And here you can just look for stuff and install software. So the first program you might want to check out is the CQR log. CQR log. And it's the go-to logging software for Linux. It's really powerful. You see, I have already installed it, and that's really a great program. I won't go into details right now because probably I'll make another video on it, but it's really a great logging software with more features than you ever need. So that's cool. Then of course you could install FLDigi for your digi modes. It's of course available for Linux as well. And then there is WSJTX, of course, which I'm not sure you can install directly. Let me see. I don't think so, because you need to download it directly. Ah, no, there it is. So it seems you can install it directly from the software manager. Let me see which version this is. Okay, it seems it's a bit older. So you might want to consider downloading it directly from their website. Let me see, there it is. Yeah, and you find all the information you need, but of course the software runs on Linux perfectly fine, so that's really cool. And one other thing about this software manager that's really useful to know, because the way it works, here, there it is. The way it works with this software manager is that Linux Mint, or rather Ubuntu, maintains these kind of packages where you can install software. The problem is, especially for ham radio software, that these ham radio isn't really a priority for them, right? So it usually happens that you won't find the latest version of the ham radio software on there. And that can be a problem, especially with all these new digi modes and all of that. So there's a little trick you can do. I'll show you with the CQR log as an example, right? If you Google, okay, so let me step back. If you Google CQR log, which is the logging software, you go to their website, what you'll see is that they provide you with a, if I just click download here, they provide you with a repository, as it's called. You see that? Since we are on Ubuntu, because Linux Mint is a variation of Ubuntu, it says we can use a repository, which means that not only can the distribution makers, such as Ubuntu, for example, maintain these kinds of packages, but individual authors of software can also maintain such packages that you then can download using the software manager, right? But for this to work, you need to tell the system where to find these packages. In other words, you need to add the author's package system, which is called repository on Linux, Ubuntu or Linux Mint. You need to tell the system where to find it, basically. And you do that by going to the command line. You can do it also in the differently using the software manager, but I think it's easier to use the command line. And thankfully, the author of CQRlog has provided you with a command that you need to use. So you just copy it, open the command line, and just paste it. I won't do it now because I have already done it, but that's the way you do it. And if you want to do the same thing, let's say for FLDG, it works the same. You just Google FLDG repository and you should find it. Let's try. There we go. Launchpad install FLDG. So you see they also provide you here with the necessary comments to do that. And then it's really cool because then you have the latest version of the software that you can install through the software manager, and it also updates it and all of that. So that's really nice to know if you want to use DG modes and the CQRlog and all of that on Linux, which you want to do because you're a ham and you want to use it for ham radio. So anyway, last tip, if you want to make Linux look a bit nicer, is to install the Microsoft font packages. Again, you do that in the software manager. Type in Microsoft. Should work, hopefully. Yes, there. And you see this TTF MS Core Fonts installer. I already installed it, so I don't need it now. You see there's a remove button, but you will see an install button. Just install it and run it, and it will guide you through the process, and it will download all kinds of fonts, like the standard fonts, right? So this is really helpful if you browse the web and all of that to make the whole experience better, to make it look better. And there are tons of other hacks and tricks for Linux. Obviously, just Google 10 things you want to do after installing Linux or something like that, and tons of stuff comes up, and before you know it, you spend like 2 days tinkering with Linux. And I hope you enjoy it. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching, and I hope you get started with Linux for ham radio, which is really fun, and I wish you best of luck on your journey. And if you found this video helpful, please consider subscribing or leaving a comment or whatever. And thanks again for watching. 73s. Bye bye.